Peter Credlin, live on Sky News Australia.
Good evening. Great to have your company. Here's what's coming up tonight on Credlin. Peter Dutton threw down the gauntlet today to the Prime Minister, challenging him to a debate over nuclear power. Albanese refused to debate the Liberal leader last year on The Voice, so will he run scared on nuclear as well? The bleeding heart left are at it again, wanting to return to Australia from Syria, women who knowingly went off to join Islamic State. At a time when tensions are already high in the community, I've no sympathy for these terrorist sympathisers, but does Labor? Plus, the royal fallout rolls on, Princess Kate admitting she's the one who edited the photograph that's raised more questions than it answered. We'll cross live with the UK a bit later on to get to the bottom of this whole saga. And with an ageing population, Labor's made clear they want seniors to pay more for aged care. But how much is more? What does wealthy mean? And who will have to pay it? As always, the devil's in the detail.
We'll support sensible reforms, but we don't know anything about what's happening with workforce, and if it's just a sop to the union movement and they're making it even more unsustainable for providers to increase beds at a time when we need those increased beds.
At first, it's becoming clearer by the day that Pete Dutton is serious about ending the nuclear ban and that the opposition will take a clear and strong alternative energy policy to the next election. Now, it can't just be nuclear because any actual nuclear power generation is perhaps a decade away. But Dutton and his colleagues have made clear it's a considered decision to go down this path, that if it really is necessary to get to net zero, the only way to do it and keep the lights on is via nuclear power. Today, the opposition leader quite sensibly said that in the context of the coming Tasmanian state election, he had no plans for nuclear power on the island state. Now, why would he, given that Tasmania is the one state that can largely run on hydroelectric power, given both its climate and geography? But as he told a Sydney Business Conference today, the coalition is scoping out 6 sites for potential nuclear reactors, with formal announcements expected soon.
And we can have affordable energy. We can meet our 3 national goals of cheaper, consistent and cleaner power. But in our judgment, you can only do that with the right energy policy, and only if Australia becomes a latest generation nuclear-powered nation. And nuclear is the only proven technology which emits zero emissions and can firm up renewables.
Well, the obvious ones would be the former coal-fired power station sites such as Hazelwood in Victoria and Liddell in New South Wales. They have 2 obvious benefits. First, they're already major power plants, so they shouldn't get the usual NIMBY sort of objections. And second, the costly transmission infrastructure is largely already in place. Meanwhile, the government's been ramping up its scare campaign. The Prime Minister yet again says he doesn't like nuclear, says it won't work here, but never actually explains why that's the case.
Nuclear power is the most expensive form of new energy, and it's the slowest to build. It doesn't make sense for our economy or for our environment. It doesn't help with the cost of living, and it certainly doesn't help with climate change.
Back in 2021, as opposition leader, he had this to say on nuclear power.
Renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy, and the markets is what determines where the investment is going.
Again, he doesn't support nuclear power, but clearly he knows very little about it. His Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, is just as ignorant, quick to hyperventilate about the expense and technical difficulties associated with nuclear.
Tell him he's dreaming. I mean, I don't know what experts he's talking to. The United States, with a very developed regulatory regime, with a very developed nuclear industry, the nuclear leader of the world. The average build time of a nuclear power plant in the United States has been 19 years. The problem is with all Mr Dutton and Mr O'Brien's claims on nuclear, when you put scrutiny on them, they crumble like a sayo in a blender.
Now, this is pretty rich coming from a government that trumpets pumped hydro. given that the Snowy 2.0 scheme is at least 6 times over its initial budget and 8 years behind the initial schedule. Snowy 2.0 is now a $12 billion plus project, capable of producing around 2,000 megawatts of power for a week without further sustainment. Now, by contrast, Dubai's first nuclear power station is now fully operational. It cost $35 billion to build, but it can produce 5,500 megawatts of power, or nearly 2.5 times that of Snowy. For this Emirati nuclear power plant, the contracts were let to a South Korean-led consortium in 2009. Construction began in 2011 and the first power was delivered in 2020. And hence the question, if the Emiratis can go from scratch to fully operational nuclear power that's twice the size of the biggest power plant in this country, all within 15 years, well, why can't we? And the second, even more obvious question for Labor's scaremongers, how can we ever have nuclear power at sea if we're not prepared to have it on land? Given that our future nuclear submarines will need a large workforce of nuclear engineers and technicians. Hence the opposition leader's challenge to the Prime Minister today to step up and debate him on nuclear.
It's why the Prime Minister should stand up and debate with me the issue of nuclear and energy in this country. I'll meet him at the press club or wherever he wants at any time. We can have the debate.
Now, at last, we have a person in authority in this country who's prepared to debate one of the really big issues facing Australia rather than just play politics. Without 24/7 energy, we cannot remain a first world economy. And nor will we be safe and secure if we can't defend ourselves, and energy security is key in that. It's the debate we've got to have. It's the debate we must have, and it's a challenge the Prime Minister can't ignore. Now, look, I was struck today by Greg Sheridan's defence of single-sex schools in the Australian newspaper, which I urge you to read. No doubt it was triggered by the rush of some prominent boys' schools to go co-ed because that's thought to be less conducive to toxic masculinity. Now, I don't know about that. Sheridan makes the obvious but rarely stated point that men and women are different. Completely equal, he says, but different. And the idea, he adds, that the differences are mainly the result of socialisation is contemporary ideology waging war against human nature. Studies have shown that boys do better in co-ed schools and girls do better in single-sex ones. Now, I don't claim to be the ultimate authority here, but I did go to a single-sex school and I went to 3 co-ed schools. I went to school both here and overseas in the United States. I went to 2 government high schools and a private school. So I reckon I've got a fair bit of personal experience. And for me, I've no doubt that single-sex schools work the best. With just girls in my class, I gained the confidence to speak up. Before then, in a co-ed class, even someone as seemingly able as me held back, worried too much what the boys might think of me because girls back then were meant to be decorative, not intellectual competitors. Once I got my confidence in a girls' school and knuckled down to study, I never looked back. Now, the argument that you need to be in a co-ed school to be able to live in a co-ed world, well, that's rubbish. I had a dad and men in my life, uncles, brothers, family, friends, and given I've ended up working in some of the most male-dominated workplaces in the country, I can't see a girls' school education ever held me back. Quite the opposite, in fact. Right now, it's boys' schools that are under heavy pressure to admit girls. Now, I'm not saying this should never happen, but if it does, let it be because the school community has made an informed decision rather than be bullied by the zeitgeist. A few days ago, even the Prime Minister waded in, saying that co-ed schools are, quote, healthy, meaning, by inference, that single-sex schools somehow are not. Now, in the end, it's choice that matters. That parents have the choice about the sort of school that best suits their child. For some, it will be single-sex schools. For others, it'll be co-ed. But the choice should always be there. Because if one thing's for certain, if the cultural commissars succeed in closing down all the boys' schools, then it will be the girls' schools next that they go after. All right, let's get the headlines now. Sky News political reporter Trudy McIntosh.
Wealthier seniors could be asked to pay more for their aged care as the government releases its long-awaited task force recommendations. It explicitly rules out new taxes or levies to fund it and rejects means testing on the family home. Older Australians, though, who can afford to pay could be asked to contribute more for daily expenses.
So the cleaning, the laundry, the food and other services, that's where the contribution comes in.
For those choosing at-home care, a fee-for-service model has been floated. The task force also calls for lump sum deposits for accommodation to be replaced by rental contributions.
This really is the funding of aged care, a can that has been long kicked down the road.
The Aged Care Minister, though, appears to be doing the same. She chaired this task force, formally received its report last December, and yet 3 months later, the government's response is still not ready.
This is complicated, dense, complex work.
With an ageing population, we want to act responsibly. We'll support sensible reforms.
The opposition leader has thrown down the gauntlet to the Prime Minister on nuclear energy.
The Prime Minister should stand up and debate with me the issue of nuclear.
You'd have to get him a map first, and you'll have to fly down to Canberra and drive him there, because he doesn't know where it is.
Within weeks, the coalition has promised to unveil its plan and propose locations for around 6 nuclear power plants.
We've started this discussion about the latest technology, nuclear, because it's zero emissions. It can provide us with cleaner power.
He had a policy 2 weeks ago. He was saying they were going to have small modular reactors. Problem is they don't exist.
And almost $4 billion will be spent in remote Indigenous communities to build more homes. The aim to halve overcrowding by building up to 2,700 homes over the next 10 years.
We want to look at measures that will make a practical difference to people's lives.
Trudy McIntosh, Sky News, Canberra.
For more of those stories, let's bring in Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell. Great to see you, as always, on a Tuesday, Andrew Clennell. Peter Dutton today doubling down on his plans for nuclear energy, challenging the Prime Minister to a debate, wanting to consult with Australians, says the opposition leader, wants this to be an adult, rational discussion with the Australian people. He wants to get a social licence, he calls it. I think all of that's smart, but given the PM refused to debate him in The Voice, do you think he'll take up the invitation here on nuclear?
Well, I guess they can debate in the Parliament next week. Peter Dutton can bring on a matter of public importance, and then it's a question of whether the PM will go into the Parliament and debate on it. That wouldn't have your classical Q&A session debate element about it, but it's a debate we might see in the House next week. Let's see.
That's a good point. I mean, people talk about question time being a debate. I mean, you get 90 seconds if you're the opposition asking the question, you get 3 and a bit minutes if you're the government, and there's no debate, it's a slanging match. But, I mean, it'd be interesting if he does move an MPI, whether or not the government sends someone in serious to take it on.
Well, I think Albanese should. I mean, he's already made it clear that he's going to run a campaign against this opposition idea. Some would call it a scare campaign. So he obviously thinks it's mad politically, so he shouldn't have any problem getting up in the Parliament and taking it on. And that would be a spectacle indeed. We should probably put some of that on politics now if it occurs.
He doesn't come back against nuclear, though. This is the Prime Minister. He doesn't come back against it with thoughtful commentary or fact. I mean, it was jocular today out of the Aboriginal announcement he was making. It's all sort of, a flippant response. And then previously he's saying, it's uneconomical, or 33 other countries around the world don't think it's uneconomical. And he talks about it, not being practical and that the market has decided. Well, there is no market in Australia because nuclear power is banned. I mean, do you think he's going to be able to debate this or even discuss this, Andrew, in a serious, rational way, or is he spooked by it?
Does he have to is the question. I mean, the issue for oppositions when they come up with big ideas like this is the government's just rallied their departments to come up with reports saying it's not possible. So that's the way this will go. It has growing popularity within the public. I mean, I hear that even colloquially, locally, should I say, when I talk to people. So it's going to certainly liven up the next election campaign. There's not much question about that. But they've got a hard road to hoe, I think, the opposition. It's hard enough to argue these big new ideas from government, let alone opposition.
Yeah, I am pleased, though, that we're having these sorts of discussions finally back in politics, and it's not just the low rent sort of personal stuff. There was a report out today. I read it, and I tell you, there was one thing in it that shocked me. Not that we've got this so-called all-time housing crisis and affordability crisis, cost of living out of control. We know all of that. This is the Housing Affordability Report. It says on average, though, that households are spending around 48%, so almost half of their income, on mortgage repayments. That's what shocked me. That's the average sort of component people are paying out from what they've got coming into the home. Renters have had an increase of nearly 24%. Vacancy rates sit below 1%. We know those issues are there for renters, but I tell you, how on earth do you survive, Andrew, if half your income goes out the door in a mortgage? And then secondly, for the government, this is a challenge to the Treasurer. How do you deal with that sort of mortgage stress in the budget in a way that's actually meaningful? Because I don't think there could be a handout that's going to touch the sides there.
No, I don't think there is either. And I did have a Cabinet Minister suggest to me the problem in Sydney with house prices is unsolvable. You've got an area like Mount Druitt, which was hardly an area people were rushing to in recent years, where the median house price is $950,000. You got Paul Keating's supposedly Battler's area of Bankstown, the median house price is $1.2 million. I put this to the Treasurer in an interview on Sunday Agenda a few weeks ago. I didn't like the question. His suburb of Logan in Brisbane's at $500,000. So the statistic around 48% of a household budget doesn't surprise me when it concerns Sydney. What surprises, because for some years it's been between 35 and 50%, frankly. But nationally, it is shocking. Nationally, it is shocking. And look, I mean, I did a few door knocks with candidates in the state and federal elections. In the state election after the rate hikes, a gentleman working from home had babies there or whatever was saying, yeah, just anything for a rate to stop these rate hikes. You know, I bought this place a year ago and it's gone up so much. So the rate cuts are critical politically for the government, but also just plain economically, because if Michelle Bullock digs in and doesn't do them by the end of the year, people are going to go bust, unemployment's going to rise, people are going to go out of business, and we're going into a recession. So the Reserve Bank, I know they've got a cautious approach on inflation, but they can't really muck around here after the last GDP figures. It needs to occur sooner rather than later. I don't think anyone would begrudge them another monthly or even quarterly inflation figure to make sure. But after that, they have to move. The cost of housing is going up. It's a significant contributor to inflation. And so it ends up becoming sort of this vicious circle instead of, because the Reserve Bank's pushing up, keeping rates high, which is pushing up rents, which in itself pushes up inflation. Now that it's in the threes, they've got to take a good look at that, the Reserve Bank. And the other thing, which the opposition will tackle ahead of the election with a policy, and say we can do better than this on Labor, which comes into play with that shocking rental vacancy figure you showed, only 0.7%, it's shocking, is immigration. You know, there's no point letting 500,000 or 600,000 people in here a year if you haven't got the housing for them. You're just squeezing the people already here.
Let me just jump in there, though. You and I both know they made a judgment call, right? Pump prime the economy with migrants, because that means at least they don't slip into technical recession. Right, we're in a per capita recession.
Well, they're not the only federal government to do that, though, are they? I mean, Scott Morrison as Treasurer was quite happy to do that.
Sure. but not to the quantum of 3 times what Morrison had. What we had last year was 3 times what Morrison had. It's 3 times the highest record that was under Rudd in 2009, right? So what they're doing here is pump priming the economy, quite rightly, but it's tepid growth, Andrew. It is not strong productivity-driven growth. It is tepid growth. And once they start to pull back on migration, which they have to, punters are cranky, the cities are crowded, all the infrastructure is a bottleneck, they'll pull back that number and they risk going into next year's election year in a recession. I mean, that's how dicey it could be. So this is why it's a line ball call. Hey, just quickly before we go, I know we're close on time. I want your take on this word that was in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age today, that Labor's looking at restricting the big money donations. Now, this would be huge if they did this. They're looking at legislation, capping the amount that could be spent per electorate. And we know this happens in some states, in state elections, but things like campaign activities of advertising, signage, all of that will get some public funding. There'll be an increase in what's currently available. It'll throw out people like Clive Palmer from election races. I think that's a good thing. It's likely to benefit, though, that the small guys, the Teals, the Independents, even the Greens, not a great thing in my view. It won't come in until after the next election. And I'm interested, are they going to hold back the unions as much as they might hold back the big major parties? What's your sense of it all?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me about this, so I did some checking. The changes would also apply to unions, but it would be a significant cap, not like what the states have. There would be caps in individual seats. You can imagine the Teals won't like that. It's about trying to stop Clive Palmer and Simon Holmes at court, particularly Palmer, influencing elections. But Don Farrell's the Minister in charge, Special Minister of State. I think he wants bipartisan support, otherwise it becomes very difficult. He wants support from as much of the parliament as he can get. That might be difficult. You might be better off with some other things he's looking at, like real-time disclosures of donations within 7 days, and perhaps just a cap at the very top end on the Palmers of the world. Some of these other changes, they're just going to be harder to get through. And look, they have been subject to High Court challenges before. Are you telling me Clive Palmer's not going to go to the High Court on this in terms of the implied freedom of political association in the Constitution? That's where this would head. Yep. So it's a long... the story is broadly accurate in terms of what the government's trying to do, but we are a long way from this going through the Senate, becoming law and coming into practice, Peter.
Just quickly, any sense on the timing? Would we see it in the coming months, at least in terms of sort of exposure draft?
So he wanted to do it, Farrell, before the end of last year. Obviously hasn't been able to negotiate successfully with the party, so you're probably looking at the tail end of this year if it does happen at all. Maybe I suspect some of it will definitely happen in the next few months, but it's whether you can get over the line on those bigger reforms. And the view of the government is they need broad agreement on them.
A little bit of a rumour out there today. Yeah, land a bit of the facts for us tonight. Andrew, thank you as always. All right, let's go down to the government's big aged care announcements today. As part of a system-wide shake-up, wealthier seniors could be asked to pay more as the government grapples with the expected influx of baby boomers into aged care. Following a long-awaited government review, Aged Care Minister Arnica Wells ruled out new levies or taxes to boost funding, instead proposing co-contributions from wealthier Australians, possibly even asking people to draw down on their superannuation. For her take on this, I'm joined now by the Shadow Health and Aged Care Minister, Anne Ruston. And thank you for your time. I was really keen to have you on tonight because my audience, I think most Australians do care about aged care. I think we all think we could end up there, or we certainly have loved ones who are headed the way of care. But it's a complex policy area. At a high level, what do we need to know about the government's plans as announced today? We know it's likely Australians will have to pay more for care and support. What's been fleshed out?
Well, that's the big issue, Peter, is that what we've got today is what I'd call is a very good discussion paper. It highlights and outlines what the challenges are before the aged care sector. And like, as you say, we all want to make sure that we've got an aged care sector that's appropriate, fit for purpose, delivers the care that we would all want, not just for our loved ones, but for ourselves when hopefully one day we reach old age and require some support. But what we've got today is, as I said, it's a discussion paper. We don't know what the government's intending. And I was pretty disappointed that they've had the report for 3 months. The Minister was the chair of the task force, so she's clearly known what's been going on for some months before that. And today we got dropped only what they received in December, with no attempt by the government to actually even indicate what considerations are on the table. And so, Australians in March have just been given something that they really could have been given in December, and I don't know why they've been kept in the dark for 3 months.
They say they ruled out taxes and levies today. They say they won't means test the family home, but I mean, can we trust them given backflips on other big issues? Because people make decisions while they're working about what their retirement and potentially aged care might look like. And if you're no longer working and all the rules change, there's not a lot you can do about it then, is it?
Well, that's one of the challenges that is before us, because we've obviously got people who are already in the system, whether they be people who are in residential care or whether they're people getting home care packages. If they make changes, we also need to, for Australians, older Australians, to have confidence that the rules they thought they engaged in when they made decisions about their retirement and their aged care stay in place. So we need to be really clear about grandfathering existing Australians. But the reality is today, we don't know the quantum of the challenge that we're trying to face. We don't know how much the government wants older Australians to pay towards their aged care. We don't know which Australians are going to be asked to pay, and we don't know what they're going to be asked to pay for. So I think the government needs to stop hiding and actually come out and have an honest conversation, not with me or the opposition, but with older Australians and their families, who I think deserve the respect to be part of this conversation, not something that's done behind closed doors and then that's kept a secret for 3 months.
Senator, one of the things people are really protective of is the ability to age in their own home, and this is where those home care packages are so important. I mean, I've always sensed that Labor has never liked them because it's usually not a unionised workforce that delivers the package care. You might get that in an aged care facility, but not when the care is being delivered at home. Are we confident that they're going to protect that home package system?
Well, I would hope so, because I think older Australians have been really, really clear that they would prefer to age at home where possible. Now, one of the things that we've got a really proud track record as the Coalition, I mean, we put in place 100,000 new home care packages just in the last 3 years that we were in government. We've seen that number downturn really, really quickly, and this government has put in only about 10,000 since they've been in government. So we clearly need to be making sure that we're making available the packages to older Australians. But the other thing that was completely missing in this, Peter, was that there was no reference to workforce. And you can have all the reforms in the world, but if you don't have the skilled workforce to deliver them, what are we supposed to do? We know that aged care homes are closing down because they can't get staff. We know that older Australians who've got packages aren't able to get the staff to actually deliver the services that those packages are supposed to deliver. So we've got a situation where I think we've had a bit of a half-baked announcement today. We should have had something about workforce, and we should have had an indication of government response.
Just quickly before we go, I mean, they talk about wealthy paying more. Do we know what wealthy is? Has Labor defined wealthy?
Well, no, they haven't, and it's so confusing whether how you're treated in the aged care sector as opposed to the age pension. The last thing that we want to see is one group of Australians being penalised for doing the right thing. And so I'd like to see to make sure that any reforms that get put in place are properly considered and have the support of all Australians, including hardworking Australians who have saved for their retirement.
Senator Ruston, thank you. All right, after the break, Queensland becomes the latest state to push so-called anti-discrimination laws that are more like an attack on religious faith rather than resembling any defence, plus youth crime getting worse, not better, in remote areas. So what needs to happen? John Anderson has had plenty of experience here. He'll join me shortly. Welcome back. Still to come, the renewed push to repatriate Islamic State brides, or terror sympathisers I prefer to call them, back into Australia. Another headache there for the Albanese government. But first, I know it can often seem like navel-gazing when the media talks about contract deals with social media giants like Meta. But the reality is the power these tech companies hold extends way beyond payment disputes and impacts the control of information, what we're allowed to debate, alternative views like you often see here on Sky News about critical issues like last year's Voice referendum. Let's not forget the work of so-called online fact-checkers who shut down news sources that supported the no case. It took me as an example off Facebook. You weren't allowed to hear from me about the Uluru statement until my good boss and management team here at Sky News appealed and got us back online. Now, if they had their way, we would never have debated the breadth of what the Voice to Parliament meant. Today, former Federal Treasurer, now of course Chairman of the Nine Network, Peter Costello, he weighed in on the Meta dispute and he said this is quite an existential moment for Australian media. Costello went on as far as to say that Meta was a monopolist which needed government regulation. To discuss this and more, I'm joined now by former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, John Anderson. John, it's great to see you as always. For me, this debate is less about, fair enough for some to run the argument, fair pay for the content from news companies like this put onto Facebook. For me, my great concern is the very dangerous place we get into when a group of billionaires in the Silicon Valley gets to decide what information Australians can have access to.
Well, I share your concerns, and we ought to keep in mind that what you've just called billionaires, many of them are, in fact, the wealthiest people the planet has ever known, both in relative terms and in absolute terms. They are staggeringly wealthy. Overwhelmingly, they are highly ideological as well. Not all of them, but most of them are. And they're also heavily invested in if I can put it this way, green energy. So if you look at California, you have what Joel Kotkin calls a new feudalism, where you have these astonishingly wealthy people at the top. In the name of environmental action, manufacturing's been forced out and has gone to other American states and China. So the middle class is gone. And then you have 80% of the emerging jobs, such as they are in California, are low paid. And in America, that means low paid. It really is a feudal sort of look. And so that gives you an idea of the sort of ideology that will be supported if these people are, able to run riot and control what we hear, what we're fed, what we're not fed. I think it's deeply concerning. I do have a worry, like Peter Costello, about what's happening to our media. It is plainly the case that it's hard to attract professionals and to pay them properly. That needs to be addressed. There's another aspect. We don't trust our mainstream media much anymore because they're so ideological. And the journalists and media schools need to ask themselves some hard questions about how well they're training people as well.
What do you make of these proposed anti-discrimination laws on the table in Queensland? A lot of religious groups, John, are up in arms about them. They say the laws as they stand would seriously impact their ability to run their schools according to their values. Surely schools that have got a faith base are right to be able to hire staff that accord with those beliefs and sack them if they don't.
Well, I see it as an attack on freedom of association. I see it as an attack on faith, particularly Christian faith, and I see it as an attack on parenting. So it's bad news all around. And then you stop and think about the hypocrisy of it all. Most of us enjoy free association with like-minded people, and we regard it as fundamental to our freedoms. So do politicians. You've worked in politics for a long time. You know full well that no political office will have in its ranks or tolerate in its ranks people who disagree fundamentally with the values of that office. So there's a double standard here. The politicians, at the behest of activists, certain politicians, are wanting to push onto us something that they would never wear themselves. And I must say this, I wonder how long it'll be before parents really do break out and say enough is enough. We want our right to responsibly raise our own children according to what we think is right and wrong, and we don't want the waters polluted by state-backed activism all the time.
I want to ask you about your old stomping ground of Walgett. You represented that seat for, well, the seat of Guida, but included Walgett for many, many years. It's back in the headlines alongside Dubbo and alongside Alice Springs, which really, I think, hasn't gone out of the headlines for its juvenile crime wave. It's gotten so bad, John, we've got kids as young as 10 committing really serious crimes. They're uploading the footage to TikTok. They know they're going to get off scot-free. What needs to change?
We actually need to listen to the voices of the people who understand the problem on the ground. Talking of voices, you mentioned a moment ago, and the voices on the ground who really understand this will say that the key is you've got to, I know I sound like a cracked record, but you've got kids coming into utterly unstable, often seriously dysfunctional, and worryingly often quite violent environments, many of them with fetal alcohol syndrome as well. And they can't get through those formative years and become kids who can appreciate education, who think it matters, who can cooperate with the classroom and not disrupt it. But you see, we're not allowed to talk about those things because in the name of civil liberties, we dare not cast judgment on. Here's the irony of it: is that we're just talking about state schools in Queensland, being required to fall in line with handing your children over to the state to be raised, but we won't even have an honest debate about what our children in Indigenous communities meet. I think it is a terrible blight on the progressive classes in this country. They will not have an honest debate about this matter, and so many of those children's lives are just thrown up against the wall.
Yeah, we rejected the voice because it was entrenching race into the Constitution, but I mean, since then, what's changed? What has the government done to grapple with these issues? It's thrown its hands in the air. We haven't got the voice, so we're not going to do anything. I saw the PM today announce $4 billion on Indigenous housing. I've been to places in the Territory like Santa Teresa where we'd spent millions of dollars on homes that were trashed within 6 months. I mean, is there any accountability when taxpayers work hard to build these homes and the homes get trashed? Is there accountability with the state the homes are left in? Or do we just roll out another $4 billion, John?
Well, it's a very good question. I saw this time and time and time again. And the people who were often the most frustrated were Indigenous leaders who, particularly some of the older men, who would weep openly with the lack of respect that their young men showed for proper process and for behaving decently and responsibly. But it just, we will not as a culture listen to anybody who challenges a progressive view that adults should be able to live their lives as they choose, when in reality we should be saying, as our forebears did, when you bring children into the world, you have enormous responsibilities and you cannot be selfish. And I know that sounds like moralising. I know that sounds countercultural. But we're talking about kids. I mean, how selfish are we going to be? And how long will we go on being unwilling to front the fact that, if you like, the breaking down of too many of our society's taboos has done immense damage to vulnerable.
John Anderson, I'll leave it there. Thank you as always. We'll catch up again soon. Just such a thoughtful man, isn't he? All right, after the break, yet another push from the bleeding heart left to bring back women who knowingly went off to join Islamic State. Plus worrying signs that leaders are withdrawing support for Ukraine in the battle against Russia. The Pope putting up the white flag with his pro-Putin comments. They're disgraceful. More on that shortly. Well, welcome back. Still to come, the royal response to Kate's photoshopped image has given rise to more questions and answers. So what's going on here? We'll get to London. We'll speak with Sarah Hewson, our royal correspondent, in a moment. But let's bring in my panel for tonight. Plenty to get through. International news right around the world. Sky News contributor Kosh Yagata. And back from his travails in Ukraine, former Labor MP Michael Danby. Michael, I've got to get your take. I'm fired up when I read reports again today that there's a renewed push to bring Australian women, or at least dual nationals, over in Syria who left Australia to join up with Islamic State. I don't want to call them ISIS brides, They knew what they were doing. They married these warriors. They had their children. They were, in many respects, contributors to the terror that really we saw there for many years, and the horrors committed against non-Muslims predominantly. I don't think they should come back to Australia. What do you think?
Well, Save the Children are well-meaning. There's little kids involved, little Aussies, you know, so I don't know why they can't go to their grandparents, but I have the same attitude as you. What evidence is there that these women were not posing a danger to Australians? I mean, we've got this government that seems to have given 2,000 visas to people from Gaza without even checking their social media. I have no faith in these people coming back here, and I just like the British finally banned that ISIS bride in the UK.
Yes.
We should do the same here. Maybe the children could go to the grandparents, but I have no faith that they'll do that, because look what they did with the Gaza visas. You know, they're always erring on the wrong side, this socialist left government.
And just because they're women, they're not safe either. I mean, you don't have to be in Israel long to hear the stories of female suicide bombers. Their sex is no guarantee.
Well, they were all over the Middle East, women in particular doing it, strapping the belt to them and going in. You can't even tell if they are women.
No, not at all. Talk to me about the Pope. He has waded in on Ukraine. I mean, his language was inflammatory, basically saying, put the white flag up, enter into negotiations, really strong pro-Putin rhetoric. The Ukrainian foreign minister, though, has hit back. He has said, live, die and prevail they will under their current flag.
Pope Francis has the problematic habit, I think, of wading into non-religious comments, political comments all the time. He's waded in from everything from economic policy to refugee and asylum law. And with these conflicts, both Israel and Hamas, as well as here in August, he actually waded in again and made a comment about Russia that he had to walk back. And that's not what he should be doing. That said, he unfortunately has made those comments, and they do carry weight to many parts of the world. And it does join in the chorus of other leaders from, you know, whether it's Orban all the way to Henry Kissinger, that are saying shades of similar things about a negotiated settlement. And it's important, I just mention that because it's important to realize and understand that these leaders carry weight and they are making these comments. And that's part of, I think, the warfare, the PR warfare about how the public is viewing this issue globally.
She mentioned the Hungarians. I mean, they are part of this chatter that's going on, aren't they, Michael, that if President Trump was to win a second term, there'll be no money. That's how the war will be brought to an end. He'll force a negotiation by the US withdrawing funds to Ukraine. It's a very pro-Putin sort of position. How accurate is it?
Well, there's a majority in the US Congress of majority Democrats and a minority of Republicans who will vote, if they're allowed to vote, to send military aid to Ukraine, Taiwan and Israel. They should be allowed to do that. But Europeans are stepping up. 18 of the 30 are now over 2%. Poland's at 3% on defence expenditure. And the Czechs have got a fantastic idea. The Ukrainians need 1 million rounds of 155mm artillery to hold the Russians off till the end of the year. So they're going to bypass Orban and co and collect it from all of the other European countries one by one. And they've sourced all of the ammunition from all over the world. So the Europeans are stepping up. The Ukrainians I met said they'd fight with spoons if that's all they had left.
And we need them to fight, because they're fighting for everybody. I mean, it's just extraordinary.
Well, it's sending the Chinese a message, that's for sure.
Let's look at the UNRWA issue. This is the UN body that provides aid into Palestinian territories, amongst many other things. I'm no fan of UNRWA. There's a strong faction and getting stronger inside the Labor Party. They want the funding to be resumed. Matt Thistlethwaite, who's one of the ministers, was out there today with these comments. Have a listen.
We're currently working through with other donor countries and UNRWA some of those issues that have been identified, and hopefully we can restore funding so that they can continue that work. I think it's important to point out that UNRWA does continue to provide relief on the ground in Gaza.
Okay, he's out of the defence portfolio, so I know he gets serious briefings. He should know about the American intelligence that confirms UNRWA staff were involved in the atrocities. We cannot fund this body any any way, shape or form.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting. I think, it's a reflection of what's happening in the constituency and the electorate of the Labor Party here, and you see shades of that in counterparts to Australia elsewhere.
Canada, you're right.
Canada, right. US, the UK. So that's what they're speaking to. They're speaking to that faction of the electorate that is the loudest voice in the room and very sympathetic to the aid side of the equation. And also back to that PR war globally, more and more people seem to be kind of joining in that we need to be sending aid to Gaza. And so he's jumping on that bandwagon. But the point about UNRWA remains. And I think what we might see is hopefully they'll find another vehicle, whether it's a UN vehicle or a completely separate mechanism for doing it, and not emboldening this organization because of the issues that have come to light.
And the US were obviously going to have a floating
pier,
wasn't it, in order to deliver the aid that way and avoid using UNRWA. I mean, why can't we go in on the pier?
Yeah, I hope it works. It could easily be a stationary target for Hamas too, or Iran. Anyhow, look, I don't have no faith in this genuflection to UNRWA or criticism of the Israelis. I mean, Albo and Wong said that they had the right to defend themselves to the point where they actually do it.
Yeah.
I mean, if we want this conflict to end in the long term, the Hamas fighting units in Rafah have to be dug out. The people there treated humanely and got humanitarian aid. But if you want just to have another war later on, well, just leave the Hamas there, as Penny Wong seems to imply.
We'll leave it there. Thank you both. Those issues aren't going away, are they? All right, after the break, who's doing the PR for the royal family at the moment? I tell you what, they need to do a better job. This Photoshop controversy has spiralled out of control. Well, welcome back. We've all seen that infamous photo by now. Princess Catherine, her children, pulled by news agencies over signs that had been manipulated. Well, Princess Kate finally responded to the controversy overnight. She's put out a tweet that says, like many amateur photographers, I do occasionally experiment with editing. I wanted to express my apologies for any confusion the family photograph we shared yesterday caused. Well, that's all raised more questions than it's answered them, hasn't it? Plenty of conspiracy theories out there. Let's get some facts into the debate. Let's bring in Talk TV Royal Editor Sarah Hewson from London. Well, Sarah, thank you for your time. I'm showing my age here, but I mean, who under the age of 40 doesn't edit the bejesus out of everything they post? I mean, I don't, but everybody else seems to do it. Was she just doing what every other person her age does? Should we be concerned?
Peter, our hands up, I don't either, because I don't know how to. But look, image tweakments, a bit of a crop, a filter here, maybe a bit of minor airbrushing, and nothing out of the ordinary in 2024 for ordinary people and also for celebrities. I mean, the Kardashians have made an entire industry out of it, haven't they? But these are not ordinary people. They're not ordinary celebrities. And this was no ordinary photograph. In fact, when it went out on Sunday, it broke the internet. It was the first official image that we have seen of the Princess of Wales since Christmas Day, when she walked to church on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk. The stakes of this were so high, and I think it tells us something of the pressure that the Princess of Wales was feeling after this wild speculation and conspiracy theories circulating online, to show that she's doing okay and to put out the best possible image that she could. And this wasn't just an image that was posted on their social media accounts. And that's where they came up against a problem, because this was an image that was distributed to picture agencies to send out to their clients all over the world. They have certain standards, a code of conduct. Any kind of editing or manipulation of a photo is not to be done. And so we have these big respected agencies issuing a kill notice. And that is what propelled this from, the dark recesses of social media into the mainstream. And really then the palace had no option but to respond.
Well, where's the PR team in the first place, Sarah, though, to let it get out?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Peter. This photograph was taken by Prince William, we're told, and then the Princess of Wales has put her hands up and said, look, it was me. I edited it. But it was then sent to royal aides. On Saturday, they received a copy of that photograph in order to send it out to the royal rota of journalists, but also to those picture agencies. knowing the level of scrutiny and interest there was going to be in this picture, why, oh, why did someone not look more carefully at it? The first thing you would have noticed is that the Princess of Wales wasn't wearing her wedding rings. Now, there's bound to be a perfectly reasonable operation that she took them off the surgery and hasn't put them back on again. But given the speculation online, this isn't a helpful image to put out there. And as soon as you see that, then you would see all of the other issues with this photograph. That's why they have advisors and aides to help them with this. And we've now ended up in a situation of trust because the picture agencies didn't necessarily put this photo through the same scrutiny as they normally would because it was from a trusted source at the royal family. And we, as journalists, need to be able to know that when something is given to us by the royal family, by the monarchy, that we can take it at face value. And I think that's the challenge now.
I think there'll be enormous interest when we see Kate at an official event in coming weeks. Thank you for your time, Sarah. You put a different complexion on things. It's very telling, you know, she's handled this illness very differently than the King, of course. I think she's right to have her privacy, but I tell you what, it's getting a huge issue out there. All right, that's it for me. Andrew Bolt's next. See you tomorrow night.